Oi, bom dia a todos. Estou vendo que já tem bastante gente entrando aqui. Vou dar só alguns segundinhos para o pessoal fazer o login e a gente começa as apresentações. Estou vendo alguns nomes conhecidos, algumas pessoas que eu conheço. Vadir, boa tarde, a gente estava se falando há pouco, né? Bom, para a gente também não passar no nosso último webinar, né, Peter? A gente, we pass a little our time, right, Peter? The last one. So let's start this one and make room for the questions.
No worries.
Então, bom dia, pessoal. Hoje o nosso webinar é sobre... Deixa eu ligar minha câmera aqui também, para vocês me verem. Todo mundo me vendo. Então, o nosso tema de hoje é reduzindo a dor no lançamento de horas. A gente já fez 2 outros webinars dessa série. Eu vou pôr o link aqui no chat das gravações do primeiro e do segundo webinar. Então, vocês, quem quiser ver depois, eu já mando o link. Então, obrigada mais uma vez por reservarem esse tempo, de estarem aqui com a gente hoje. Para quem ainda não me conhece, meu nome é Rita Standerski, eu sou diretora de operações da Goya Consultoria e parceira exclusiva, né, da Ticket. Nós somos parceiros exclusivos da Ticket aqui no Brasil. Então, a nossa série das 10 verdades sobre o lançamento de horas, que termina hoje com as nossas últimas verdades. Semana que vem a gente vai ter mais um, que é com a demonstração do produto. Mas hoje, mais uma vez, vai ser apresentado pelo Peter Zver, que é o presidente da Ticket North America. Ele atua há mais de 2 décadas no mercado jurídico norte-americano e europeu, e quem já esteve aqui antes já o conheceu. Então, ele de novo está com a gente. A gente conta com o apoio e a organização da ILTA, que é a mais importante organização, associação, né, de tecnologia da área jurídica. A apresentação vai ser feita em inglês. Então, a gente tem o recurso da tradução simultânea ali embaixo. Vocês só precisam clicar, quem quiser ouvir em português, clica naquele botãozinho que é um globinho, Interpretation, e aí vocês podem selecionar o português. Então, aí vocês podem ouvir a apresentação toda em português. Também vou enviar pelo chat o link no nosso site, onde tem esses PowerPoints que o Peter está apresentando em inglês, a gente tem ele em português no nosso site. Então, quem quiser ir lá, pode fazer o download e ver, acompanhar, se quiser acompanhar em português, os slides estão lá. No final do webinar, a gente vai ter uns 5 minutos para responder algumas perguntas aqui ao vivo. Então, ali embaixo tem o recurso Q&A, acho que nesse ponto da pandemia todo mundo já usou o Q&A em algum webinar, em alguma coisa, então façam suas perguntas lá, pode ser diretamente em inglês, a gente já lê para o Peter, ou em português, a gente traduz para ele responder. Tá bom? Também o que eu puder, eu vou ajudando vocês também. E o que mais? Esse webinar também vai ser gravado, depois a gente envia para vocês o link. Apresentações feitas, recursos mostrados. Agora eu vou passar para o Peter. So, Peter, your turn now. I'm muting my microphone. I did the presentations again. So, it's with you now.
Thank
and
you.
Thanks again to being here with us again for the 3rd time. It's been really, really interesting seeing all these truths being explained. So thank you again.
Well, thanks, Rita, and it's always a pleasure to be part of it. Also, a thanks to ILTA for sponsoring, and obviously Goya for organizing this 3rd webinar in the series of 3. The title is Reducing the Pain in the Timekeeping Process. Before we get started, and I think this webinar, the 3rd one, is the most exciting one because we are going to delve into the future a little bit and see where timekeeping is going and where technology is going to support the timekeeping process. So out of the 3, I feel this one's the most exciting one for the audience, I believe. A quick review on our first two webinars and some of the other truths that we put forward. We talked at the beginning in webinar 1 about lag to capture. It's a key metric. We always want to measure performance. How good is timekeeping in the law firm? And we want to not just say we think it's good, but we want to say we know it's good because it went from this level to this level. So getting good metrics in timekeeping performance is important, and it will also serve in other areas. We also talked about the carrot and stick. How do we motivate? How do we motivate individuals? And as someone who's been in the industry for 30 years, I've seen the stick used in many, many forms: compensation, penalties, locking screens, all kinds of methods of the stick. We're seeing more and more progressive firms moving towards the carrot approach, simply because of truth number 2, which time technology today is giving the professionals tools to better enter time, better engage with timekeeping process, and that is supporting the carrot approach of motivation. Obviously, also the metric, where we've consumerized the metric, we brought the metric into the consumer technology, that's also a factor. So the truths that we're talking about interrelate. Each one complements the other or supports the other. As far as best of breed, specialized time technology, and the key things must deliver on 3 things: accessibility, personalization, and usability. A lot of times we have a very, very functional application, but functionality that is not accessible, not personalized, and not usable is a waste. So I always say, before you look at functionality, look at accessibility, how it's personalized, how it understands the user, and is it usable? So that was truth number 2. We also talked about in webinar number 2, the billable hour. It's got a lot of attention in the press or the legal media press. Is it dead? It's not dead. The billable hour is not dead. It's still being used a lot in the North American market. I'm sure in the South American market as well. However, there is a movement that the hour is becoming the measure, where we want to capture all the hours to support the cost of service delivery. More and more, as you see in the lower right-hand side, law firms or law firm clients are asking for predictability in their legal spend. They want certainty. That means that a law firm has to have a business acumen that is really, really fine-tuned and understanding the cost of service delivery. That means that law firms are measuring every hour. So we're not talking about the billable hour anymore. We're talking about the hour. How many hours are used in producing the service that you're delivering to clients, irrespective if it's billable or not? And that metric is now, that measure is important. So the billable hour is still there, but the hour is starting to dominate. We talked about compliance versus revenue. We always obviously want to maximize revenue, but we also want good time entries so that they are projected well and they're collected. Ultimately, the name of the game is the work that you're doing should be paid at the end. And if you try to put these processes together, you might lose on both. So what we're saying is good timekeeping practice or best practice is where the process of revenue capture is easy, fluid, contemporaneous, and compliance process is a layer that comes on as a separate, at a separate level later on in the cycle, so that you could win on both. More revenue, better quality of time entries, and obviously that leads to more profitability. So today's webinar, and if you look at the right-hand side, the magic pill, we talked about, is there a pill to reduce the pain? In health, we always say, I got a headache, let's get a pill. Let's take a Tylenol or an Advil or whatever it may be. In timekeeping, the word passive timekeeping has been described as a pill. And passive timekeeping addresses certain questions that lawyers always have. I'm missing at least 3 hours for last Monday. What did I do? Help me. Or I'm late on a timesheet this week. Help me catch up. You know, I was extremely busy and I didn't have time to get my timesheets in order. Where do I start? Do I start from zero and try to remember? Or is there something that can help me? Or, you know, reviewing the month and you know that typically you're short on target, you know the work is there, where is it? Can I find those missing hours? And passive timekeeping tries to address these issues. It really delivers that aha moment. I remember now. Okay, let's get that in. I completely forgot about that work that I've done. And it's served up clearly via the timekeeping application. So the definition of passive timekeeping is it discovers and exposes users' digital activity for potential conversion to time entry. We work on a computer, we deliver services using our computer, it's our tool. We produce documents, our work is attached to either our laptops or our desktops or our mobile devices. And there is evidence, that is data. And if we mine that data, which that diagram on the right, the image says, if we mine that data, and can that give us the evidence we need to construct time entries? But all of this is done within the timekeeping application. Typically, this process exists in all your law firms, whereby you're missing some time, you go check your Outlook, your email, some of the documents you worked on, potentially the phone calls you made, and you try to use those as memory triggers. The only difference in modern timekeeping is all that data is all been mined and it's presented side by side with your timesheet. So it helps you with the memory triggers needed to construct the time that possibly has escaped. So really, some of the activities we're talking about in passive timekeeping is anything in the Microsoft Office suite. We got your telephone systems, who you called, who called you, who you emailed, who emailed you, agenda appointments, any certain sites you do for legal research, all that can be tracked and presented up in an interface side by side. There's the timesheet, which is the day view here. Time Finder, this is passive timekeeping, is here. They sit side by side. One is the memory triggers. The day here is your timesheet. It's a simple one-click conversion if that data has to now become time. So it consolidates it actually optimizes an existing process that is in place in your firm. It just makes it a little bit simpler, a little bit more accessible, and that results in more time data. So that is passive timekeeping. It is becoming a feature of modern timekeeping systems. Moving on, we did the passive timekeeping. This came to market in North America in 2005. It's been 10, 15 years. This type of technology has been in place in what we call best of breed timekeeping systems. We're on to another level now. AI is the buzz. Everybody's talking about how artificial intelligence can support certain processes within the firm to optimize service delivery, reduce costs, et cetera, et cetera. In terms of AI targets, you can't just simply take artificial intelligence and apply it everywhere. You gotta pick the spots where the return on investment is obvious. A lot of factors when you look at AI, you're looking at high volume unstructured data. That's where AI shines, where it's labor intensive. Obviously where the machine can do better than the man over time, and where the return is more than the level of investment. Obviously, if we put so much investment and the return is not there, it might not be the right place to apply AI, and its various forms of AI. It's not just AI is a general statement. There's cognitive services, there's NLP, there's a few other, there's subcategories of artificial intelligence, and those can be selectively applied to certain areas. If you look at this definition, document review, contract review, where associates spend long hours looking and finding the risk elements of these documents, AI is a perfect fit. But where is the fit into timekeeping? Is it obvious? And if it's obvious, or maybe not obvious, in which areas does it fit best? So we'll talk about this. If you look at the timesheet property, I mean, we have a low transaction count. We do 8 to 10 entries per day on average. We have something called work continuity, meaning when I do time today, it looks a lot like yesterday because we're continuing work. We're continuing some of the same files we're working on today, tomorrow, and yesterday. So there is what we call work continuity, and that helps in the timesheet without AI. It's just natural. So it's not as random as potentially, you know, scanning big data like a document review process. Codification. You know, obviously more and more of our law firm clients want codes applied to the work so they can analyze it better. In the legal industry, the code sets are maybe 10, 15, 20, 30, maybe 50 codes that have to be applied to a certain work or a service that's being performed. You know, if you look at the medical industry where AI is very prevalent already, and if you're looking at patient files, you know, some of the code sets, this is in the US anyway, the Disease Control Center, the code sets are 14 to 68,000 different codes based on reviewing diagnostics, treatments and recoveries, et cetera, et cetera. That's a lot of codes. So AI is being used extensively to match and codify those records so they could get better data long-term. Obvious high transaction, whereas in our area, in the legal industry, the code sets are fairly low. And our historical data is low volume. You know, we have, like I said, 8 to 10 entries per day. Even if you're 1,000 lawyers or 500 lawyers in a law firm, that's still relatively low and it's very structured. So it's not as obvious AI against timesheet or the time process as it is against big data documents and sort of the document review process. However, that being said, if we look at the timekeeping process and break it down a little bit to see, is there potential fit? And if there is some fit, where should we be applying AI? We already talked about discovery and awareness. This is what we call passive timekeeping. We just talked about that in terms of finding data to help me remember, finding data to help me construct. Application of AI in this area can lead to, I might as well click on the next slide. Application of AI in this area can lead to a suggested timesheet, okay? Because I know what I did, I can say, here, I'm suggesting a timesheet for you, as opposed to starting from zero. So that could be an end goal. We're using AI in the discovery awareness part, and also bringing relevancy to the equation. As far as recording, when the human gets involved, that's the point where we could assist the human. We call this augmented human, where I'm entering time and the system is suggesting because of past experience, etc., or it's interpreting my conversation. This is where natural language processing comes into play. We call this the augmented human area, and it could be applied to the recording process. And I'll show you an example in a second of this area, okay? And over here on the right is the third stage. We talked about compliance. You know, once we think we have a good entry, we apply a check. Is this compliant in the eyes of the client requirements? And that's where, you know, what we call analyzing, is the entry too vague? You know, objectively, the entry is good, but it does not have, subjectively, is been refused in the past, this entry on a bill. Can we identify that in the timekeeping process? And can we apply that intelligence to come up with a flag that says this could be potentially non-compliant? So there's 3 areas in the discovery, the recording, and the compliance, and AI can play a role in all of these. And we'll talk a little bit where Ticket has embarked on this journey, and we'll show you some examples. So here's an example of compliance where we think an entry is good, and simply we run a compliance check. So after we've done our part, we've done everything perfect, we got all the properties, we put all the fields in, the time entry is perfect, is there a compliance check that we could run that ties into the client requirements of what's a valid entry? And that can tell you things like it's too vague, you got to describe the entry more, you know, it's not clear enough, it's too short, the description, et cetera, et cetera. So a compliance check can be performed. It's almost like spell checking, but taking spell checking one level further and applying AI to it. These are the same tools that a lot of the corporate counsel are using to validate bills when they're received by law firms. They apply AI to see if there's any opportunity to reduce the invoice and see if there's any non-compliance. It's important that those same tools can then be used inside the law firm to combat or counteract that process. Augmented human, this is one that's already in play. This is actual live where I'm having an intelligent conversation with the system in English. It could be done in Portuguese, but we are now having a conversation and we're applying NLP and consumer technology. As you can see, this is done on a phone, whereby we're putting in, you know, a couple of sentences, and those couple of sentences conversation leads to 15 time entries. So this is what we call augmented human, where the user is involved. However, in terms of putting in 15 entries versus talking 2 sentences, you could see the ROI in that process. And it's an area where we see is a natural fit for timekeeping, where we support the human, and that augmented human area is an area that we are already working on and continuing. So in terms of the priorities, what we see in AI, we're already, obviously, you've seen the augmented human and natural language processing, the intelligent conversation, that's already happening. We see a major need to validate and comply the entries to the client's demands. And obviously, we always see that passive timekeeping process, number 3, where we see there's opportunity there. So there is opportunity in timekeeping in the various forms of artificial intelligence. And this is where best of breed timekeeping is going to move towards, where it's going to be a tool where the human is going to be supported to engage better, and of course reduce the pain, because we know it's a painful process. As far as mobile timekeeping, reflex or not, we're moving on to another truth. So we've talked about passive timekeeping, we've talked about where AI fits in, and where we're going, and where the industry is going. And now we're talking a little bit about mobile timekeeping, which has been around for 15 years. Is it a reflex or not? We have a lot of data to support this. I would say 70, 80% of our clients are engaged in some kind of mobile timekeeping. We see it's not a reflex yet. Our data shows that it's being used about 40% rotationally. What we mean by rotational participation means that at any given time, 40% of the firm is using mobile timekeeping because of the circumstance. Obviously, in this period, in a lockdown period, everybody's in front of a computer, probably at home. it's probably not as prevalent, so that percentage might be lower. But in the normal course of business, we've seen about 40% of the lawyer population at any given time using mobile timekeeping because they're on the road delivering services or away from the desk. So in its early stages, mobile timekeeping was attached to away from the office. In order for a reflex to happen, what we feel is there's got to be a mind shift that's needed where it's not just about mobility, it's about usability and access. The fact that it's on a mobile device doesn't mean that I have to be away from my work area. It might be, as you've seen in the intelligent conversation, an easier way to enter time at your desk. So when we say a mind shift is needed, in order for the reflex to happen, we have to get away from that because technology today do not distinguish between mobile and desktop. It's technology. It should happen anywhere, any footprint. It doesn't matter the platform. It doesn't have to be specifically labeled as mobile. It's just another entry point for time. So what we're saying is a small form factor plus the consumer equals high adoption. That's going to lead to a reflex. That should bring up the number considerably because it's just another way of engaging. And you know, when I walk into a law firm who's using Carpe Diem or some of the Carpe Diem as a specialized system, I enjoy when I see attorneys using their mobile device in the office. You know, that's adoption because they've engaged in the consumer experience and it won over the desktop experience. They just find it easier. So like I said before, success is when mobile form factor is used even at your desk. That's where success is achieved. Then the mind shift has been achieved where it's not connected to being away from the office. So this is happening more and more. In early days, it was really tied into away from the office. And today, it's just one more way of achieving less pain in the timekeeping process. So we've talked in webinar in our first webinar about ROI and metric. We also promote objective metrics even in the mobile timekeeping space. We call it newfound time. I always say it's always good to. We always say the term manage to measure, measure to manage. Actually, you got to measure first and then manage the results of the metrics. In this case. The metric that's been used in this area where a lot of firms like to get a hard ROI. You know, did we get an ROI from this mobile investment or this investment? And we let the firm define newfound time. And it's about time that's outside the main work hours. So it's in these gray zones, you know, from midnight to 8 a.m. and from 6 p.m. to midnight outside the main working hours, weekends. We call these the newfound time zones. And that's where we measure. We don't measure in the normal business day. And we measure in very small increments, less than 10 minutes, you know. How many of those have been captured? And that contributes to the crumbs. So we're really capturing the crumbs, as you see here on this image. And we're accumulating those crumbs to see does that support the ROI. And typically, we've seen about 1.7 hours per timekeeper per month of what we call just discovered time that is really, really small outside the perimeter of a working day. And it's a very compelling ROI because it's the law firm that defines it. They define the times where they see they define the metric that suits them. They apply the rate that is their rate, and then they come up with the ROI. And it's one of the rare areas where you could say we spent X amount on technology and we've achieved this much return in real dollars with a statement that the law firm develops or a metric that the law firm develops. And the last truth, which is more of a summary truth, the truth of them, what differentiates specialized timekeeping? Why would a firm invest in specialized timekeeping systems? And you've seen timekeeping is starting to break away from accounting systems. It's a different mentality. When we're talking about the AI process, the quick capture, the passive timekeeping, the intelligent conversations, it's more leaning towards consumer technology than it is what we call business enterprise system. So this idea of consumer technology added with intelligence, we think it's a great combination to, again, create that magic pill, reduce the pain, and really differentiate what a specialized timekeeping system should do versus what we call an entry form system. Some of the key things, and this is summarizing pretty much everything we discussed over the last three webinars. A consumer experience usually equals zero training. We support it with intelligence in any of the three areas I talked about. It's got to be anytime, anywhere. We can't refuse time for any reason. So the system has to be receptive to capture. It's got to be personalized. It's got to know the individual because there's a relationship that has to be formed there for efficiency purposes. It has to be motivated and gamified. We talked about the running app in webinar number 2. There's got to be motivation, and a lot of that is done through gamification. It feels like a running app. There is challenges. There's metrics. You're achieving things. There's huge opportunity there. So again, we're leaning towards consumerization versus what we call enterprise application. And we've spoken a lot about metrics. We need metrics that really connect to the timekeeping performance. It's not just about saying, oh, I got my budgeted hours in for the month, everything's good to go. Realizing that 15% of that is not collectible because it was poorly entered, it wasn't compliant, it was refused by the clients. It creates a debate with the client, and that could be very expensive in terms of financially, but also from a relationship point of view. So at the end, in a statement, we were looking for more revenue and better relationships. We want to win on revenue, but we also want to win on relationship. And I think by having firms putting emphasis on the timekeeping process, which is at the beginning of everything, it starts with the work. You could achieve both. You could achieve more revenue and better relationships with, best practices and the right technologies to support it. And finally, as this is webinar number 3, I've just listed all the 10 truths that we went through over three sessions. We have talked about the billable hours dead. We're measuring the hour. The future of best of breed is moving up. There's more interest in specialized timekeeping now. Motivation, carrot, is starting to not dominate, but it's being looked at more seriously with the technology and the new best practices. Time capture, this is passive timekeeping, is supporting time entry. Help me remember, I need support. If I'm late, I need support. You need that timekeeper or passive timekeeping as part of the technology. AI, there is a fit. You just have to be strategic in where. We like the intelligence and helping the human. So it's not give me the perfect timesheet and I send it to a client and the machine is going to do it for me. I don't think any lawyer will sign off on that without reviewing. So we like the idea of intelligence supporting the human. And what I showed you in that intelligent conversation is a good example of that. The KPIs, we talked about the velocity and the newfound time. NFT stands for newfound time that would not be found, was found because of the technology. Mobile timekeeping is trending up, and simply because it's becoming just an entry point and not defined simply as mobile away from the office. So that's happening. We talked about compliance and revenue. We want to separate them, make sure we get the revenue in, and then we make sure it's compliant, as opposed to trying to do both at the same time. We didn't talk a little bit about opportunity at the intersection of time, but there is opportunity if you get a lot of traffic and you get people engaged with timekeeping. There's other opportunity in terms of connecting to other technologies, connecting to information, connecting to compliance, awareness, and those type of things. And finally, the truth number 10, we always say we see consumer tech playing a key role. We're seeing intelligence being injected into the application as another key ingredient to deliver more revenue and ultimately better relationships as the ultimate goal of this. So this is the end of webinar number 3. I hope you enjoyed it. We covered the 10 truths. I think there is a document that Goya has circulated about the 10 truths. We went to them in detail. There is another webinar coming up on the 23rd on looking at how all this fits into the actual applications, which is going to be much more focused on the technology. And we open up for any questions now.
Yeah, thank you a lot, Peter, for the presentation. It was very good to hear. I'm just gonna make a comment first. It's good to see someone talking about artificial intelligence and showing an application, because we see a lot of people talking about it, but it's like something everybody wants to use, the artificial intelligence, but how do you use it, and how can I use it tomorrow, not 5 years from now or 1 year from now? So I think you showed a very good example, and maybe I know there are a couple of more examples. So maybe next week you can show, when you're showing the solution, you can show a little bit more about this. I'm sure everybody would like to see that the application, right? Because artificial intelligence is something everybody talks about, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's, I mean, it's been in every session. There's a lot of PowerPoint out there on artificial intelligence. And a lot of times, one of the key things I was mentioning is, where do you apply it? Where do you apply it logically, simplistically? And, you know, to get results today. So I think we decided to take a simple approach. We wanted to help the human, and that's where we're starting, and continuing on with that journey. Great.
I don't see any questions right now, but if the people who are attending, if you wanna send questions later, or maybe ask the questions next week, we'll be very happy to answer them. Last webinar, we have like a lot of questions, and I don't know if any of them was unanswered by us, but please feel free to reach out to us. You've got, I think all of you got my email. I'm sending here on the chat. You can write me, and just right now it's here, and I'll forward to Peter, and I'll be happy to see all of you next week, when Peter's gonna show all the technology involved in Carpe Diem, okay? So thank you very much, Peter, and see you next week.
Yep.
No,
thanks,
so
everyone.
we say, I'm just gonna do a wrap up in Portuguese, okay?
Okay.
I began in Portuguese, so let's end it in Portuguese. Yeah. Então, pessoal, muito obrigada. Eu vejo aqui que tem algumas pessoas que apareceram já, acompanharam todos os webinars. Muito obrigada pela participação de vocês. Então, semana que vem, espero, né, conto com a presença de vocês. Qualquer dúvida, me escrevam. Mandei aqui o meu e-mail. Tá bom? Até lá. Bye, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a good rest of the day.
You too. Bye.